Good morning, everybody, and as my colleague said, my name is Andrea Lechner, and I'm a Program Officer in the Secretariat of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions. The meetings of the Conferences of the Parties to the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions will be held on 4th to 15th of May 2015 in Geneva in the International Conference Center. As decided upon by the Conferences of the Parties at their meetings in 2013, there will be joint sessions on joint issues, but there will not be extraordinary meetings of the Conferences of the Parties, and there will not be any high-level segment. In order to address the wish from parties to focus on substantive issues of the meetings, the theme of the meetings is From Science to Action, Working for a Safer Tomorrow. We expect about 1,500 participants from up to 183 party countries, and of course also from observers, NGOs, IGOs, etc. At the end of the slide, you can see our meeting website, where you can find all the meeting documents, information for participants, how to register, and all other relevant information on the meetings. The invitation letters for the meetings have been sent end of November last year, and the deadline for registration, and in particular for the requests for financial assistance, was end of January at the beginning of this year. Nominations are to be made through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or the permanent missions of your countries, with an official nomination letter or note verbal. Our contact person for registrations in the Secretariat is Ms. Stephanie Cadet. If sufficient funds are made available, the aim is to fund one participant for all the eligible countries that are party to the conventions. That means if your country is party to the 3 conventions, it would be up to 3 participants for the full 2-week duration of the meetings. We have received a certain amount of voluntary funding for the meeting already, and are very thankful for the generous contributions from the EU, Germany, Japan, Norway, Poland, and Switzerland. And these contributions amount to around $500,000 US. And in order to fund all participants, we would need some additional funds. So far, we were already in a position to confirm a first group of participants to confirm their financial support, which are 252 participants. And we're now looking into the additional resources required to confirm all those participants that have sought financial support. When traveling your trip to Geneva, please take into account that we have a tentative schedule for the meetings, but the order and the timing of the sessions could change. For example, it could be that the COP starts half a day early or half a day late, and it would be good if this could be taken into account in doing your travel arrangements. As always, the presidents will try to limit the number of contact groups and other working groups running in parallel in order to allow also small delegation to participate effectively in all the discussions. As always, our meeting will be paperless, which means that pre-session and in-session documents will not be made available on paper, but through an intranet page. In terms of credentials, the bureaus have discussed in the intersessional period on the approach to follow on the preparation of the reports on credentials. They have agreed at their joint meeting in November last year that originals and copies of credentials in good order will be accepted, with the understanding that the original will be submitted as soon as possible. As you can remember, at the last meeting of the Conferences of the Parties, there was a lot of discussion on how to submit credentials, and the bureaus have thus worked in the intersessional period on this approach, weighing the advantages, disadvantages, and taking into account current UN practice. And this is the approach that they are suggesting for the upcoming meetings of the Conferences of the Parties. In the second half of the slide, you see some general information on the submission of credentials. They need to be issued by the head of state or government or by the Minister of Foreign Affairs. The submission should be done to the Secretariat, if possible, no later than 24 hours after the opening of the meetings, which would mean 10 a.m. on Tuesday, the 5th of May. We have developed a model for credentials, which is available in all 6 UN languages on the meeting websites. And the credential for all the 3 meetings can be submitted in one document. And this is the way the model looks. Meeting documents are now available on the meeting website. The provisional agendas were posted when the invitation letters were sent out end of last year. And the budget documents have all been posted on 4th of February 2015, which is 90 days before the meetings. The other meeting documents are now also up. Most of them are up in languages that were posted last week. And there are only a few documents that are available only as advanced English and not yet in languages. On the organization of work, the last meetings of the conferences of the parties, as I mentioned, decided that there would be no high-level segment or extraordinary meetings, but that there would be joint sessions on joint issues. And the bureaus of the 3 conferences of the parties have worked in the intersessional period on developing the tentative schedule and to decide on which items would be discussed in joint sessions. The overall approach of the meetings is similar to the one followed in 2013. That means on the day before the meetings open, that is the Sunday, 3rd of May, there will be preparatory meetings. Typically those are bureau meetings, regional meetings, and if needed, of some of the intersessional working groups. The meetings will then start with joint sessions on joint issues and will then be followed with the separate meetings of the COPs. And the order of these meetings is the same as in 2013, which means it will start with the Stockholm COP, followed by the Basel, and then last the Rotterdam COP. We will now have a look at this in a bit more detail. This is a simplified version of the tentative schedule of work, which is posted on the meeting website. As you can see, on the morning of Monday, there will be openings of the 3 meetings, and each meeting will then adopt its agenda. The meetings will then start with joint sessions, and the first joint session will be on organizational matters. This is in particular the organization of work. That means the 3 meetings will decide together on how to structure the work of it in the following 2 weeks. And then the meetings will also discuss election of officers in a joint session. The aim of this session is to introduce to the 3 COPs the different positions that are available on the bureaus, in the subsidiary bodies, and then give the meetings time over the 2 weeks to consult within the regions on these elections. The next item that will be taken up in joint session is POPs waste, and this will be a session only among the Basel and Stockholm Convention COPs, because the matter of POPs waste is only on the agenda of these 2 meetings. The aim of discussing this in a joint session is on one side to allow Basel and Stockholm Convention experts to consider together the work undertaken on the technical guidelines on POPs waste, but also to start this work off early in order to allow a contact group to start working on the various POPs waste technical guidelines as soon as possible. After that session, it is expected that a contact group will be set up on the POPs waste guidelines and that it could already start working during the week. In the afternoon, there will be a joint session first on technical assistance, which will include the discussion on the technical assistance program, as well as regional centers under the Basel and Stockholm Conventions. The discussion will then be followed by financial resources, and this also will be composed of 2 parts. On one hand, there's the discussion on financial resources and mechanisms under the Stockholm Convention, so the part that is really specific to Stockholm, and then there will be a discussion on financial resources for the 3 conventions, which will in particular include the discussion of the integrated approach and the special program. Both these items, technical assistance and financial resources, will be introduced. Plenary will be invited to discuss, but then it is expected that both these items will be sent to one contact group that is joined for the 3 conventions in order to discuss in more details these agenda items and prepare draft decisions. On the morning of Tuesday, the joint sessions will continue. They will first start with a joint session on compliance among the Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions, and my colleague will later on talk in more detail about compliance. The next item will then be on international cooperation, where the parties will be able to consider the international cooperation activities undertaken by the Secretariat. And they will also be able to discuss what used to be called wider cooperation in the omnibus decision taken at the last meetings. That means it's cooperation within the chemicals and waste clusters, for example, with the Minamata Convention, with SAICM, but also even larger cooperation in the environmental development agenda, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals. On international cooperation, there will be decisions taken by the three conferences of the parties. However, that will not happen during the joint session, but later on during separate sessions of the three COPs. The next agenda item that will then be introduced in joint session is the budget. And there will be two parts will be introduced. One is strictly speaking on the budget and the organization of work of the meetings. And the second one is that under this agenda item on budget, there will also be a discussion of a few of synergies agenda items. For example, there will be discussion on the review of arrangements under this agenda item. Because as you could see in the agendas of the three COPs, there's no separate agenda item on enhancing cooperation and coordination, but the items have been integrated in other agenda items. And the review of arrangements will be taken up under this agenda item on budget. It is expected that the contact group on budget will be set up after the discussion in plenary, and that will be working during the 2 weeks of the meetings. In case that parties want to work further on the draft terms of references for the review of the synergies arrangement, the bureaus thought that a Friends of the President group could be set up in order to work on this matter. The COPs will then look at two other items in joint session. One is the next meeting of the conferences of the parties, and the other one are other matters. And these other matters will only be those that are common to the three conventions. Currently, that would be the memorandums of understanding between the COPs and UNEP, and also the admission of observers. And in case the COPs have convention-specific other matters, they would be taken up later on during the separate sessions of the COPs. This would then be the end of the joint session, and in the afternoon of Tuesday, the Stockholm Convention COP would start with its convention-specific agenda items. One thing that has changed this year compared to the 2013 meetings is that the Bureau suggested that the last session of the Stockholm Convention COP be actually not on Friday morning, but on Friday afternoon. And in Friday morning, the Basel Convention COP would already start with its agenda items. The aim of this approach is that the Stockholm Convention COP, on the one hand, has more time to finalize its work. For example, if conference room papers have to be translated or some work in contact groups has to be wrapped up, so they have a little bit of more time to finish their work. On the other hand, it also gives the Basel COP time to start their agenda items earlier on and to start working on these items. As you can see, at the end of the Friday morning session, there's a little session that is being held in joint session, and the aim of this is that it adopts the report of the joint sessions held on Monday and Tuesday. You can then see that the Basel COP will continue on Saturday, and that on Sunday, no official meetings are being planned. Basel COP would continue on Monday, and then there is the same model as used at the beginning of the Basel COP, which is that the Basel COP finishes on Tuesday afternoon, but the Rotterdam COP already starts on Tuesday morning, so that again, Basel COP has some more time to finish its work, and the Rotterdam COP can start its work earlier. You can see that the agenda item that the Stockholm COP needs to deal with in separate sessions are they're a bit less agenda items, which is also why the Rotterdam COP actually has half a day less of sessions allocated. For the Basel and Stockholm COP, it's 6 sessions, so 6 half days, while for Rotterdam it's only 5. On the last day, there could then be joint sessions on Friday if necessary. For example, if the three COPs have still items that they would like to discuss in joint sessions. And then in the afternoon, there will be separate sessions of the three COPs to adopt any outstanding decisions and to close their meetings. On this slide, you can see another overview of which items will be dealt with in joint sessions, and I think we have been discussing them already. On the convention-specific agenda items, you can see here an overview of some of the items. There will, of course, be a discussion on the country-led initiative with its three major components: the work on the ratification of the ban amendment, the work of the ESM expert group, and the work undertaken on further legal clarity. On the technical guidelines, we have already mentioned that there will be work on the POPs waste guidelines, and there are actually 7 guidelines in front of the conferences of the parties for consideration. And there will also be the technical guidelines on e-waste and on mercury waste. Related to the Implementation and Compliance Committee, the COP will consider the work program of the committee and also 4 draft guidance documents developed by the committee. Under national reporting, the Conference of the Parties to the Basel Convention will, among others, be invited to consider adopting the revised reporting format. And under the Cartagena Declaration, it will also be invited to consider adopting the roadmap for the implementation of the Cartagena Declaration. Some other agenda items will include the Basel Convention partnerships, the work under PACE and Enforce, and also the work under environmentally sound management of ships. One other important agenda item for the Basel Convention COP will be the open-ended working group, and in particular the future of its operations. Under the Rotterdam Convention COP7, one major issue could be the listing of chemicals. And the Conference of the Parties will have for consideration recommendations by the CRC, the Chemical Review Committee, to list 5 chemicals. 3 of these chemicals are actually new chemicals. Those are the 2 pesticides, metamidophos and trichlorphone, and the severely hazardous pesticide formulation on fenthion. 2 of the chemicals have already been in front of the Conference of the Parties previously, and that's the severely hazardous pesticide formulation paraquat, dichloride, and chrysotal asbestos. Non-compliance will also be an important issue under the Rotterdam Convention, and under status of implementation, there will be a discussion on increasing notifications of final regulatory actions and import responses. Under the Stockholm Convention COP, there will also be a consideration of listing of new chemicals. The meeting will have 3 chemicals recommended by the Persistent Organic Pollutant Review Committee in front of it. 2 of them, that's chlorinated naphthalenes and hexachlorobutadiene, are being recommended for listing in Annexes A and C to the Convention. And they're recommended for being listed in Annex A without specific exemptions. And they're being recommended at the same time to be listed in Annex C because of the unintentional production of these chemicals that occur. On pentachlorophenol and its salts and esters, the Persistent Organic Review Committee has actually recommended them for listing in Annex A with specific exemptions for the production and use in utility poles and cross arms. Among others, the Stockholm Convention COP will also consider adopting its compliance mechanism. It will look at the continued need for certain specific exemptions. Related to PFOS, it will be looking at the continued need for acceptable purposes and specific exemptions for this chemical. On DDT, there will also be an evaluation of the continued need for the use of DDT, and there will be a discussion of the roadmap on alternatives to DDT. The COP will also consider some guidance documents that were developed for PFOS and BDEs, and also some NIP guidance documents. You can also see some further agenda items that will be discussed by Stockholm, such as the Global Monitoring Plan and Effectiveness Evaluation, the reporting, and the progress in evaluation of PCBs. In terms of potential contact groups that could be set up during the 2-week period, the bureaus have considered the following groups. There will most probably be a joint contact group on budget, as well as a joint contact group on technical assistance and financial resources. As I mentioned previously, if the COPs would like to work further on the terms of reference for the review of the synergies arrangement, this could take place in the form of a Friends of the President group. Specifically for the Basel Convention, there would be the usual 3 contact groups. The first one being on compliance and legal matters, which could take up items related to the Implementation and Compliance Committee, as well as on further legal clarity. The technical matters group could take care of the technical guidelines. And under strategic matters, there would be a possibility to work, if needed, on the ESM work under the country-led initiative, as well as under the Cartagena Declaration. But this will depend on whether further work is considered to be needed. Under the Rotterdam Convention, there's a possibility for having a contact group on the listing of the 5 new chemicals, or those of these chemicals where there's not an agreement right away in plenary. There could also be a Friends of the President group on compliance. And under Stockholm, there could also be a Friends of the President group on compliance. The bureaus have preferred that these 2 groups would be separate, so that there would not be one joint group working on compliance under Rotterdam and Stockholm, but that there would be 2 separate groups. Under Stockholm, there's also the possibility for setting up a group on listing of chemicals. One event that will take place during the meetings of the conferences of the parties is the so-called Science Fair. The Science Fair will take place from 7 to 9 May in the margins of the meetings, and the objective of the fair is to increase the understanding and the awareness on the scientific basis and the scientific processes that underlie the 3 conventions. The Science Fair will take the approach of booths, presentations, panel discussions, and events that take place during the meeting in order to present scientific elements under the convention to the participants of the meetings. There will be presentation of materials, there will be videos, there will be tools presented in order to explain the different processes under the conventions. The Secretariat has been reaching out to a number of partners, for example, the members of the subsidiary bodies, members of expert groups, regional centers, intergovernmental organizations, non-governmental organizations, in order to provide the whole range of information on the scientific processes under the conventions. There will, of course, also be the usual set of side events during the meetings. There can be up to 2 side events during lunch break and up to 2 side events in the evening in order to present the work undertaken by partners and in order to provide a platform for discussing further issues under consideration by the meetings. The registration for side events and booths is still open until 28th of March 2015. We have already received quite a big number of requests for side event and booths. The last element I would like to bring to your attention are the regional preparatory meetings. At the meetings in 2013, the conferences of the parties requested the Executive Secretary to organize such regional preparatory meetings in order to support parties with the challenges of back-to-back meetings. These meetings are being organized in order to allow parties to consider meeting documents in advance of the meetings, to familiarize themselves with the organization of work, and also to undertake regional consultations on the various agenda items. We have been working very closely with the Bureau members of the 3 COPs in preparing and developing these regional preparatory meetings. Thanks to the very generous financial support by Switzerland and the EU, we will be able to support the participation of 2 participants from each country that are from eligible party countries in the meetings. The meetings are being held back-to-back with workshops in support for the ratification and effective implementation of the Minamata Convention on Mercury. So the meetings will always be for 4 days, 2 days of BRS regional preparatory meetings and 2 days of Minamata workshops. And what is happening is that the 2 participants from the BRS side, they are financed to attend the BRS meeting, but also the Minamata workshop. And the same is happening. The 1 participant sponsored to participate in the Minamata workshop will also be funded to participate in the BRS meeting. That means that in total, 3 participants from all eligible countries will be financed to participate in the meetings. We are also working very closely with the regional centers on organizing these meetings. And as you can see now in this slide, the Asia Pacific regional meeting is actually taking place next week in Jakarta and is being organized with the Basel and Stockholm Conventions Regional Center in Indonesia. The meeting for the African region will then be held the week after at UNEP premises in Nairobi and is being organized in cooperation with the regional center in Kenya and also UNEP and the regional office for Africa. The meeting for the Central and Eastern European region will then be held in the week after Easter in Bratislava and is being organized with the regional center there. And the meeting for the Latin American and the Caribbean region will be held in the week of 14 to 17 April in Montevideo, also in cooperation with the regional center there. As you can see in this slide, there will be interpretation provided into the languages indicated. Our executive secretary will be participating in all 4 meetings in order to meet the countries and discuss with them their regional priorities and their needs. Invitations for all these meetings have already gone out, and actually the registration is now closed for all of these meetings except for the GRULAC 1, where the deadline for registration by participants has been extended until the end of this week. The programs for these meetings have been defined by the Bureau members of the region. All of them cover the organization of work of the 215 meetings. They cover the joint sessions and a certain number of the convention-specific topics. Further topics were decided upon by the region and are specific to each of the regions. The meetings also include a joint session with the Minamata Convention, where the participants can exchange on cooperation between the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions and the Minamata Convention, and discuss areas of common interest. Finally, please note that in addition to the webinars that are being held this week and next week, we have also already held 1 briefing for permanent missions in Geneva on the 29th of January, and we're holding another one, which is now tentatively scheduled for the 22nd of April 2015. And once that is confirmed, invitations will go out to the permanent missions. We have held a briefing via teleconference for the Committee of Permanent Representatives in Nairobi on the 12th of February. And there will be a briefing for permanent missions in Rome, which is tentatively scheduled now for the 8th of April 2015. With that, I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and again refer you to the meeting website where you can find further information, and I'll be looking forward to answering questions after the second presentation. Thank you.
And good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I'm going to be making a short presentation on compliance under the Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions as follows. Just a bit of background information. As you probably all know, the legal basis for the development of procedures and mechanisms on compliance are set out in the respective Article 17 of the Rotterdam and the Stockholm Convention. This provision reads as follows. The Conference of the Parties shall, as soon as practicable, develop and approve procedures and institutional mechanisms for determining non-compliance with the provisions of the Convention and for the treatment of parties found to be in non-compliance. Negotiations were initiated since COP1 in 2005, building on preparatory work that had been undertaken during the INCs. At COP6, compliance was considered as a joint issue within a joint contact group. The outcome of the work of the joint contact group was considered by the COPs that adopted the two following decisions, decisions RC6/9 and decision SC6/24. In those decisions, the respective conference of the parties decided to consider further at COP7 for adoption the procedures and mechanisms on compliance required under Article 17 of the Convention, working on the basis of the draft text reflecting the outcome of the work of the contact group on compliance that met during COP6 as annexed to that decision. Some intersessional work took place between COP6 and COP7. The Bureau of the two conferences of the parties considered the issue of compliance during their respective individual meetings in May and June 2014. Both bureaus supported that intersessional efforts would be undertaken in an effort to resolve the outstanding issues, including through the organization of a luncheon with permanent missions in Geneva, and also the preparation of a brief on compliance outlining the state of affairs of the matter and presenting solutions applied under other MEAs for addressing the outstanding issues. During their joint meeting in November 2014, the matter of compliance was again considered by both bureaus. First of all, in the context of the organization of work of the 2015 COPs, and as Andrea just outlined to you, the bureaus agreed to have a joint introductory session on RC and SC compliance, but they are proposing that compliance would then be considered as a convention-specific issue, including through two Friends of the President's groups, and this would be up to the COP to decide. With respect to the substantive matter of compliance, the bureaus welcomed the organization of a luncheon with permanent missions in Geneva prior to the 2015 COP's regional preparatory meetings, and this luncheon actually took place on the 11th of February. The bureaus also considered and welcomed a brief on compliance prepared by the Secretariat, and they also requested the Secretariat to disseminate the brief through webinars and during the regional preparatory meetings, which is why you're listening to me now presenting this brief. So I'll now briefly present this brief. It is set out, first of all, is in an INF document, which is identical for the Stockholm COP and the Rotterdam COP. The references appear on the screen, INF 12 and INF 40. The structure is as follows. There's an introduction, then there's an overview of the compliance negotiations under the Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions. Then there's a presentation of the few outstanding issues in the compliance procedures under the Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions. And then the brief has three appendices. Appendix 1 lays out some possible lessons learned from the compliance procedures developed under other MEAs. Appendix 2 is Decision 6/9 from the Rotterdam COP, and Appendix 3 is Decision 6/24 from the Stockholm COP. The outstanding issues in the compliance procedures under Rotterdam are two. The first one is about the decision-making rule on matters of substance in case the committee is unable to reach agreement by consensus. And the second one is a possible third trigger for submissions, more specifically, the possibility for the Secretariat to make a submission to the committee. Under the Stockholm Convention, the procedures are still contain brackets on the following three issues: the scope of the procedures, a possible third trigger for submissions, with here a possibility to either have a Secretariat trigger or a committee trigger. And the third element pertains to the possible action that could be taken by the Conference of the Parties, with brackets around three types of action: the issuance of a statement of concern, a request to the Executive Secretary to make public cases of non-compliance, and the possible suspension of rights and privileges under the Convention, or undertaken any final action that may be required. In addition to the brackets under the specific consequences, there are brackets around a paragraph referring to some consequences that would not be applicable to developed countries or countries with economies in transition whose non-compliance is due to lack of technology or technical and financial assistance. There are also brackets around another paragraph requiring the committee to take full account of the specific needs and special situation of least developed countries and small island developing states. Finally, under the Stockholm procedures, there are brackets in the title of the procedures with a choice between references to compliance or non-compliance. As I mentioned, Appendix 1 of the brief presents some possible lessons learned from other MEAs. The following 12 MEAs were considered: the Basel Convention, the Cartagena Protocol, CITES, ESPO, the ITPGRA, the Kyoto Protocol, the London Protocol, the Minamata Convention, the Montreal Protocol, the Nagoya Protocol, the Rotterdam Convention, and the Stockholm Convention. It is important to highlight that the information provided on those MEAs is for information purposes only, and it is without prejudice to parties' understanding and interpretation of the relevant MEAs and decisions adopted within their framework. For a complete overview of the matter, the parties are kindly invited to go back to each MEA, to their rules of procedure, and to the terms of reference of the compliance procedures adopted therein. So what the brief does is that it takes the issues that are still outstanding and looks at possible lessons learned from the other MEAs. With respect to the scope of the compliance procedures, which is a Stockholm Convention issue, Table 1 provides an overview of the approach taken in 11 MEAs. The scope of the compliance procedures reviewed include the obligations or commitments under the Convention, all provisions of the Convention, and the provisions of the MEA. None of the reviewed procedures specify individual provisions falling within their scope. With respect to the issue of the decision-making rule on matters of substance, which is a Rotterdam Convention issue only, Table 2 provides an overview of the approach taken in 11 MEAs, including 3 with a draft decision-making rule. The decision-making rule, respectively a draft rule, on matters of substance under the compliance procedures of these MEAs include majority, 2/3 majority, 3/4 majority, and consensus. With respect to possible Secretariat or committee trigger, which is an issue under both the Rotterdam and the Stockholm Convention, when we refer to third trigger, we understand that it is in addition to the already provisionally agreed party self-trigger and party-to-party trigger. Table 3 provides an overview of the approach taken in 8 MEAs that actually provide for a Secretariat or a committee trigger. What the table shows is that the formulations vary with respect to the conditions for the use of the trigger, namely a specification of the functions of the Secretariat of relevance to the trigger, and this is a direct link to the kind of information that will serve as the basis for the use of the trigger. And the second element is the obligations under consideration, so the party's obligation under consideration that could allow such a third trigger to be used. With respect to the possible action by the Conference of the Parties, this is the Stockholm Convention issue as text has been provisionally agreed under Rotterdam. Table 4 provides an overview of the approach taken in 11 MEAs, including one in which it is the committee rather than the COP that applies the consequences, and that's under the Kyoto Protocol, and one draft compliance procedure, as I just mentioned, under the Rotterdam Convention. Measures of a similar type to those currently in brackets in the draft procedures on compliance under the Stockholm Convention include issuing a caution or warning, publishing non-compliance, requesting specific action, for instance, special reporting or the submission of a compliance action plan, the suspension of rights and privileges, or more generally, a reference to taking other measures as appropriate. Table 4 also reflects the way in which the COP is to take into account the special needs or circumstances of countries when deciding on a specific measure. Finally, with respect to the title of the procedures, which is the Stockholm Convention issue, Section E of the brief lists the title of the procedures adopted or under the consideration of 11 MEAs. The majority of the MEA agreements reviewed refer to compliance rather than non-compliance. And this completes my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.